So recently I was going to buy an RTX 4070 for my wife's computer, upgrading from a 3060 Ti and running some competitive benchmarks against this 4070 Ti. But with all of the good benchmarks out there, and I'll link you to some of my favorite videos, I wanted to talk about something else entirely. Gamers are facing a choice that really we've never had to, and I want to talk about why the 4070 Ti and the 4070 may be the worst positioned GPUs I've seen ever. But before we get into the doom and gloom, I do want to remind you on a positive note about this month's giveaway. Modern games take up a ton of space, so I thought, what an appropriate way to give back to the community than giving away a 980 EVO 1TB NVMe. Make sure your motherboard can support this, but the giveaway details for this will be linked down below in the description. So the two topics of conversation are DLSS and FSR and VRAM in the current generation of Nvidia GPUs. And while both of those used to be just value adds to either side of a GPU, they're now almost a requirement for anybody who wants the game at higher resolutions or higher settings. Recent videos from Hardware Unboxed have illustrated the difference between the two technologies, but also the limitations of a 12GB VRAM card, especially in the modern day. And for the first time ever, fully a third of everybody who games, at least according to Steam survey, isn't gaming at 1080p. I would guess the vast majority of people are either 1440p or 4K, with some people still being at maybe 720p or below. Now, this was something I don't think any of us expected to have to deal with for quite a while. There are a lot of modern games, from Call of Duty to the Resident Evil 4 remake, that can actually use more than 12GB of VRAM depending on the resolution and settings you decide to run at. And that's a problem for the majority of people who are going to be sinking $600 to $800 in a GPU, where before, if you made that type of investment, you could reliably have this card for 4 or 5 years before having to make a major upgrade. And Nvidia has kind of pulled the wool over everyone's eyes by using DLSS and FSR as a way to bridge the gap when the game doesn't have enough VRAM. And running my own recent tests, even though the performance I would say is still fairly good at higher resolution and higher settings, depending on what type of game you're playing, in modern titles like Resident Evil 4, there are some situations where really turning on FSR, turning on DLSS is no longer a gentle, suggestion, but a requirement, especially if you want to take advantage of higher resolution and higher frames per second. And even games like Hogwarts Legacy, which obviously are terribly optimized and still require a ton of hardware power to push through, illustrate the point that if you want to be playing at higher resolutions, higher settings, and you want to maintain good FPS, VRAM is now a gigantic consideration, even with things like DLSS and with frame generation. But with 1440p monitors becoming so cheap, along with hardware in general becoming so more powerful, I think a vast majority of gamers are going to be jumping ship in the next 4 to 5 years. And whereas before, you could buy one of these cards and reliably know that it was going to do the job for that amount of time, now anybody who buys one of these may already be replacing it within a year or two when the new Unreal Engine 5 drops, and that is going to be a game changer as well. Well, it comes down to the game that Nvidia has played specifically with software. It's just the fact that right now, everything from encoding to DLSS is better when it comes to Nvidia cards, and when it comes to ray tracing, while AMD has certainly gotten far better, they still can't compete when you're talking about pure numbers. The other thing is that both the 4070 and 4070 Ti have access to frame generation, which, yes, increases latency dramatically, but as somebody who's used it before and uses it often, having the amount of FPS you can squeeze out of titles that support it is dramatic. And remember that Unreal Engine, the new one anyway, will have DLSS 3 be implemented into the engine itself, meaning that game producers are going to be able to have that to start out with, and they expect that adoption of both DLSS and DLSS 3 or frame generation is going to be far more dramatic than it was before. Now, AMD has said that they are going to be releasing FSR 3.0, which is their version of interpolation or frame generation to compete directly with Nvidia. And it's also true that AMD has kept their promise, because their GPUs have aged like fine wine, as the recent videos from Hardware Unboxed has illustrated, due to the amount of VRAM and general driver improvements over time. But the problem is that all of these are promises of future performance, future driver optimization. What's available now is what people decide on, and if you don't believe me, fully 9/10 of the gaming market still use Nvidia GPUs, even though there are cheaper AMD alternatives that I would say are just as good or sometimes an even better long-term investment. But for anybody planning on playing at 1440p or 4K, my suggestion is to save up a little bit more if you're not going to be skipping this generation altogether, and either investing in an AMD card that has 16GB of VRAM. VRAM is going to play a gigantic difference now in the performance you get with your card and how long that card lasts. We really need Intel, honestly, to step up their game. Remember that they loaded their 770 with 16GB of RAM, meaning it's going to have, I suspect, a lot longer of longevity, but they really need to get their drivers on point. They need to offer higher tier performance options for people. But it's going to be interesting to see if both ARC and AMD age like fine wine, because Intel may be the game changer that we need. Anyway, guys, I'll see all of you next time. Thanks for watching.